Good morning.
Good morning.
For those of you expecting to see Caddy, she will be here June 30th giving a talk. I appreciate her switching with me. And Caddy had actually switched with Dawn. So for those of you that were planning on seeing Dawn, I hope I don't disappoint you. Happy Father's Day to all of you. It's funny, I've since taking over the children's program, I don't do talks very often with the adults. So I was planning for my talk and thinking about the big differences. And one of them I think is going to be very hard to get used to is the fact that I have gotten very used to hands raised, kids calling things out, telling me about their experience with whatever we're sharing. So I'm afraid you all might be a very boring group. So feel free to just call out. It'll make me feel like I'm at home. So today my Dharma talk is on one of my idols, might be too strong of a word, someone I try to model my life after, the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat. And I was fortunate enough to get to see him 2 years ago at one of his retreat centers in Batesville, Mississippi. Now, does anyone know what Batesville is famous for? Oh, caskets. Batesville Casket Company. And now when you're driving down the road, you will probably notice. Quite often they pass through St. Louis, a great big truck that says Batesville Casket Company. So I find it kind of interesting that Brother Tay, as he's often called, decided to make a retreat center there in Mississippi. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. Has anyone been lucky enough to go to a retreat with Thich Nhat? I'll highly recommend it. Should be on your bucket list, as they say in America. So one of the benefits of Facebook, going off track for a little bit, is that you can actually like or friend Thich Nhat, the Dalai Lama, and some other very well-known people, Pema Chödrön, and then you get wonderful talks sent to you on your page. So it is one good thing about Facebook. And I noticed today a talk popped up from Thich Nhat regarding Father's Day. And I found it very interesting, especially being in the mental health profession as I am. I don't know if many people realize this, but Mother's Day and Father's Day can be very, very difficult days for many people who are suffering from depression or anxiety. And reason being is because either their parents have passed on and they're still grieving, having a difficult time getting over that, or we have many people in this world who are trying to become parents themselves and having very difficult times. So it's very hard to hear about mothers and fathers when you're trying so hard yourself. So for as happy of a day as it can be for people, it can be a very, very sad day as well. I also work with children, and this last week, it's not uncommon at all. Any of my children who have never met their fathers or whose fathers have passed away have really been acting out behaviorally. And those of us in the mental health profession know the reason why, because this is at the forefront and it's very hard for them to accept. So I was very happy to find a talk that Thich Nhat did on Father's Day in 2008. And I hope you don't mind if I read it to you, because it helps us see how Father's Day is something we all can celebrate. And this is just part of his talk. He stated, "We know that the core of the Buddhist teaching is non-self. This is something people find very hard to accept because everyone believes that there is a self, and you are yourself. You are not the other person. But with the practice of looking deeply, we see things differently. You see yourself as a person, a human being. You say that you are not a tree, you are not a squirrel, and you are not a frog. You are not this other person. You are not your father. You are not your mother. That is because we have not looked deeply into our true nature. If we do, we will see that we are at the same time a tree. It is not only in our past lives that we have been a tree or a rock or a cloud, mother, father, but even in this life, in this very moment, you continue to be a tree. You continue to be a rock. You continue to be a cloud, a mother, a father. In fact, you cannot take the tree out of you. You cannot take the cloud out of you. You cannot take the rock out of you. Because if you could, you would no longer be there as yourself. In the Jataka stories, it is said that in past lives the Buddha had been a squirrel, a bird, deer, an elephant, a tree. It's very poetic, but it does not mean that when the Buddha was a human person living in Sravasti, he was no longer a tree, a rock, a deer. He continued to be all of these. So when I look into myself, I see I am still a cloud, not only during a past life, but right now. There was a lady who wrote a poem about her husband. Her husband is a student of mine. That student of mine is very fond of my teachings and come often to hear me. She said in this poem, "My husband has a mistress, and his mistress is an old man who sometimes dreams of being a cloud." I don't think that description of me is correct, because I am not dreaming of being a cloud. I am the cloud. At this very moment, you cannot take the cloud out of me. If you took the cloud out, I would collapse straight away. You cannot take the tree out of me. If you did, I would collapse. So looking deeply into our true nature, we see that what we call self is made only of non-self elements. This is a very important practice, and it does not seem as difficult as we may imagine. So you are the son, you are the daughter, but you are not only the son or the daughter, you are the father, you are the mother. If you take the father out of you, you collapse. You are the continuation of your father. You are the continuation of your mother, of your ancestors. That is non-self. Son is made of father, and father is made of son, and so on. And the practice is that every day we have the opportunity to look at things in such a way. Otherwise, we live in a very shallow way, and we don't get to the heart of life. So that's why we can wish Happy Father's Day to everyone. So now on with my talk. It was definitely a bucket list wish for me to get to see Thich Nhat. I've read many of his books. He's written over 100. I have not read all 100 of them, but I've read many of them, as well as poetry, songs, magazines. And so in October 2011, this wish came true. And I was able to go to a 6-day retreat in Magnolia Grove Monastery in Batesville, Mississippi. And I was able to go with Eileen, which many of you know. The retreat was led by Venerable Thich Nhat, in which there was a daily morning meditation, and then he would give a daily Dharma talk. Our topic for the week was cultivating the seeds of compassion. We would then have daily groups, quiet time, deep relaxation, and then groups again. Half of the day was silent, and the rest of the day we were able to talk. Some things I noticed about Thich Nhat. I've often said whenever I've seen the Dalai Lama, I feel and see pure joy. His laughter, his happiness. You can just feel the joy emanating out of him. Therefore, you can feel the joy in all the audience. If I had to pick a word to describe Thich Nhat, I would say ultimate peace and ultimate mindfulness. This is a man that every step he takes in mindfulness. And you can feel the ripple effect. You can feel the entire rest of the retreat participants becoming peaceful and mindful as well. One of my favorite things there was he likes to do a walking meditation, and he likes the children to start and to lead with him. And he picks different kids' hands to hold each time. So he decided before he started walking, he wanted to give a short talk. And the little boy that was next to him was quite hyper. He was jumping up and down and shaking his head around and did not distract Thich Nhat at all. Those of you who ever have to talk, you know that can be quite distracting. If one of you start jumping up and down right now, I may have a hard time focusing on what I was saying, and I have my notes in front of me. All he did very gently was he took his hand, continued to talk, and just cupped the little boy's head in his hand. And the little boy immediately melted into his hand and was completely calm. And all of us start clicking pictures at that point because it was such a wonderful thing to see. So it was wonderful to see the effect that he had on children as well. The other thing we noticed about him with the complete mindfulness is that we would take walks into the woods. And his walks were extremely mindful. And when he needed a break, he would sit down at that moment and take a break. When he needed some tea, he would stop and drink some tea. And everyone else behind him would stop as well. And in those moments, we noticed he would watch different people in the crowd. Very quiet, very silently, he would watch people. And some of us noticed, and we talked about this in our group, it was almost as if his face was mirroring the expression on someone else's face. I don't know if anyone has ever experienced that before, but it's quite profound. He was looking throughout the audience of the people that were sitting around him, and his face would change so subtly that it felt as if he was truly connecting with whatever person he was staring at, which shows how deep his mindfulness and compassion is. So this talk will focus on the life teachings and example of Thich Nhat Hanh, and we'll end with practical tips on how to use his teaching into our own everyday lives. Which anyone who knows, has done any research on Thich Nhat Hanh, it's very, very hard to read about him and not automatically figure out how to carry this over in your everyday life, because he does give very practical teachings on things you can do. So Thich Nhat Hanh was born October 11th, 1926 in central Vietnam, which makes him 86, is that correct? 86 years. Going on 87 years old. And he's still holding all those retreats. That's quite amazing when you think about that. At the age of 16, he entered a monastery and received training in Zen and the Mahayana school of Buddhism. And he was ordained a monk in 1949 at the age of 22. In his very early years of monkhood, he held many roles. He was the editor-in-chief of a periodical called Vietnamese Buddhism. He was the founder of the Van Hanh Buddhist University in Saigon. He was the founder of the School of Youth for Social Services. This organization in particular was when he started to very much become engaged in helping the outside world. This was an organization that was comprised of Buddhist social workers and all peace workers who went to rural areas in Vietnam to establish schools, build healthcare clinics, and help rebuild villages. In 1960, at the age of 23, Thich Nhat Hanh came to the U.S. to study comparative religion at Princeton University. New York realized how brilliant of a man this was, so very soon after he became a lecturer in Buddhism at Columbia University. At this point, besides his native language of Vietnamese, he was also completely fluent in French, Chinese, Sanskrit, Pali, Japanese, and English. Amazing. In 1963, he returned to Vietnam. Those of you can remember there was a great conflict going on at the time between North and South Vietnam. So he returned. He felt it was his job at this moment to aid his fellow monks in their nonviolent peace efforts during the great conflict between the North and South Vietnam. And he actually had a lot of criticism back then, because he would say he will help anyone who needs the help, be it a North Vietnamese or a South Vietnamese. And many people believe that he should take sides in this. And his response typically was, I don't see a North Vietnamese, I don't see a South Vietnamese, I see my brothers, I see my sisters. So he believed in relief efforts without taking sides, as well as the other peace workers that worked with him. In his call for peace statement, he declared, it is time for North and South Vietnam to find a way to stop the war and help all Vietnamese people live peacefully and with mutual respect. In 1966, he returned to the United States to lead a symposium in Vietnamese Buddhism at Cornell University and continue his work for peace. He was trying very hard to educate the United States on the need for peace between North and South Vietnam. And it's at this time that he met Martin Luther King Jr., and there are some wonderful pictures of the two of them together. And he urged Martin Luther King Jr. to publicly denounce the Vietnam War. Up until this time, Martin Luther King Jr. was remaining neutral on the subject, despite people asking his opinion. But Thich Nhat Hanh had actually written a letter to Martin a year earlier called In Search of the Enemy of Man. And a part of it, if you do not mind me reading, it's a very beautiful letter. You can probably Google it and find it. But part of it says, now in the confrontation of the big powers occurring in our country, hundreds and perhaps thousands of Vietnamese peasants and children lose their lives every day. And our land is unmerciful and tragically torn by a war which is already 20 years old. I am sure that since you have been engaged in one of the hardest struggles for equality and human rights, you are among those who understand fully and who share with all their hearts the indescribable suffering of the Vietnamese people. The world's greatest humanists would not remain silent. You yourself cannot remain silent. America is said to have a strong religious foundation, and spiritual leaders would not allow American political and economic doctrines to be deprived of the spiritual element. You cannot be silent, since you have already been in action, and you are in action because in you, God is in action too. This actually changed Martin Luther King Jr.'s mind on remaining neutral. And in 1967, Dr. King gave a famous speech at the Riverside Church in New York City. And it was his first time where he publicly questioned the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Later that year, Dr. King nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the 1967 Nobel Peace Prize. In his letter, he stated, because no honor is more respected than the Nobel Peace Prize, conferring the prize on Nhat Hanh would itself be a most generous act of peace. It would remind all nations that men of goodwill stand ready to lead warring elements out of an abyss of hatred and destruction. It would reawaken men to the teaching of beauty and love found in peace. It would help to revive hopes for a new order of justice and harmony. And if anyone's wondering, the Nobel Prize Committee did not give out a Nobel Peace Prize that year. There have been, I think, 8 or 9 other times where they didn't. I think there was concern about having a Buddhist representative to have that Peace Prize at the time. But it is still quite wonderful, the friendship that remained between Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh. So as a result of Thich Nhat Hanh's powerful nonviolent political stance, he was exiled from his homeland, and this continued for almost 30 years. He went into exile in France, formed a retreat center called Plum Village. Has anyone been lucky enough to go there? It's about 2 hours south of Paris. So maybe we should plan a trip, Master Giro. In 2005, following many negotiations, Thich Nhat Hanh was given permission from the Vietnamese government to return to Vietnam. This was a very joyous moment for him to go back to his homeland. He was allowed to teach there, publish 4 of his books in Vietnamese, and travel the country, and he has since returned again. He currently is a teacher, author, poet, and peace activist. He has published over 100 books in over 20 languages. He lives in the Plum Village Monastery in the south of France, yet travels extensively giving retreats and talks. It's amazing, given his age, how much energy this man still has. He has 3 retreat centers in the United States. One is Blue Cliff Monastery, which is in New York, Deer Park Monastery, which is in California, and Magnolia Grove Monastery, which is in Georgia. The teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh are very powerful. I've often heard people say that they feel his teachings are simple. And then I wonder if they mean the word simple as a compliment, because I would certainly take it as one. But many people have said that his teachings are simple, which helps them to understand them better. I did a book group once with some friends of mine who are non-Buddhist, and we did Pieces Every Step, that is a book you have not read by Thich Nhat Hanh. I highly recommend it. And the comments that were made were, well, obviously, slow down while I'm washing the dishes. That's easy, I understand that. And my response was, well, remember your thought the next time you're washing the dishes. It's one thing to say it simply, but it's quite another when you're actually taking part in this action. Thich Nhat is the leading proponent of a Buddhist approach to politics and social action called engaged Buddhism. This is not a separate sect of Buddhism. This is more of a movement. He is chosen to become very politically active and wanting to make sure that every individual, both Buddhist and non-Buddhist alike, are called to social action. He believes we are all led to do this. This term, engaged Buddhism, was coined by Thich Nhat Hanh in 1963 at a time when his country was ravaged by the Vietnam War. Again, this is not considered a separate branch of Buddhism, but more of a movement. It's a cross-denominational movement. Many people are part of the engaged Buddhism movement who in themselves are not Buddhists. And it involves lay community, monks, Western converts, Eastern Buddhists, and many other religions are part as well. While maintaining the Buddhist emphasis on inward spiritual growth, engaged Buddhism also aims to reduce the social suffering and oppression through political and social reform. Thich Nhat Hanh says the compassionate bodhisattvas of Mahayana Buddhism. Those bodhisattvas are those who postpone their own enlightenment to assist others. He looks at them as the ideal for an engaged Buddhist. And in his book, Interbeing, if you're interested in learning more about the engaged Buddhism, this is the book to buy. I think it's currently $11 on Google. It's called Interbeing. He lays out the following 14 precepts of engaged Buddhism, which emphasize social change as beginning with oneself. And I can quickly paraphrase those. You will notice quite a few of them are very similar to our 5 precepts. Number 1 is do not be bound to any doctrine, theory, or ideology. Test these for yourself and make sure they help yourself and others. Number 2, learn and practice non-attachment from views in order to be open to receive others' viewpoints. Number 3, do not force others, especially children, by any means whatsoever to adopt your views, simply for them to adopt them. Number 4, do not avoid suffering. Do not close your eyes before suffering. Number 5, do not accumulate wealth while millions are hungry. Number 6, do not maintain anger or hatred. Number 7, practice mindful breathing to come back to what is happening in this present moment. Number 8, do not utter words that can cause discord. Number 9, always speak truthfully and constructively. Number 10, take a clear stand against oppression and injustice, and always strive to change a situation without engaging in partisan conflicts. Number 11, do not live with a vocation that is harmful to humans and nature. Number 12, find whatever means possible to protect life and prevent war. Number 13, possess nothing that should belong to others. And number 14, do not mistreat your body or the body of others. His life, besides engaged Buddhism, has also been dedicated to the work of inner transformation for the benefit of individual and society. Quite a few of his books focus on that, on mindfulness, on peace, on reducing anger within yourself. So they're very personal and very inner transformative. His key teaching, if he was asked, he said would be that through mindfulness, we can learn to live in the present moment instead of in the past and in the future. Dwelling in the present moment, he has said, is the only way to truly develop peace, both in oneself, in one's family, in one's community, and in the entire world. Many of his books has also been about Buddhist teachings, which are explained in a simple, user-friendly manner that appears to both Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike. Thich Nhat Hanh has been a wonderful example to all people of compassion, mindfulness, and complete acceptance of others. Martin Luther King Jr. said of him, "I know of no one more worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize than this gentle monk from Vietnam." Thomas Merton, who is a well-known Catholic monk and mystic, met Thich Nhat Hanh at his monastery, and he immediately told his students, just the way he opens the door and enters a room demonstrates his understanding. He is a true monk. He is my brother. Oprah Winfrey, who many people really enjoy listening to, She actually interviewed him and said, the moment I met Thich Nhat at the Four Seasons Hotel in Manhattan, I instantly felt his sense of calm. A deeply tranquil presence seems to surround this Zen Buddhist master. His compassion is also shown with specific topics on his retreats. He works particularly with those of us in the helping profession, police officers, Vietnam vets, and anyone else who has had any suffering. A personal story, not about me, that I would love to share happened on this retreat, and other people may have heard this, so I apologize if you have. There is a question and answer session towards the end of his talk where many people go up and sit and wait to answer. And you could see this one man, he was sitting very close to me, and you could feel his distress. And he had very long hair, and he had a jean jacket, and you could see he was a Vietnam veteran, a United States Vietnam veteran, and he had all the patches on. And he began shaking when it was time for his time to talk. And he simply asked Thich Nhat Hanh, how can I expect anyone from Vietnam to forgive me when I can't forgive myself for what I've done? And at that instant, he just started sobbing. It was a very profound moment. And Thich Nhat Hanh gave him a beautiful, simple explanation on how he could forgive himself and how he could see himself as being interconnected, and really spent a lot of time with him, and seemed to give him a great deal of relief, which was beautiful in itself. But after that moment, when the question and answer were completed, there were a group of 10 to 15 women who were Vietnamese, who said they were Vietnamese boat women, and they tend to follow Thich Nhat Hanh on his tour. And they all encircled him and said, we forgive you. We forgive you for what happened. We love you. And they all formed this huge circle and held each other. And that's just one example of just seeing the transformative nature, that peace and love and compassion. And for days afterwards of that retreat, that man was then with those women. They took him in as his own. And you just have to wonder what these women had gone through, but to have that kind of forgiveness. And so you could just see the changes happening just from that moment. So how can we learn from his example? I don't think I need to spend much time on this part. To me, it seems very self-explanatory. As discussed in his book, Peace is Every Step, we can find mindfulness in every single activity we do. I'm reminded of a talk, I think it was at one of our retreats when Master Jiru, and I'm going to paraphrase this, it said that it's the minute you put your foot down on the floor after you wake up in the morning, that's when the mindfulness begins. It doesn't begin at a certain destination or a certain place. It's the moment you put the foot down on the floor. I have another good friend who, every night before he goes to bed, he turns his teacup upside down. And in the morning when he wakes up, he says, Alleluia, my teacup is upright. I have another day of mindfulness and love. So just two small examples. We don't have to come here to practice mindfulness and then leave here and start becoming mindless. In every single thing that we do in this lifetime, we can be peaceful. We can be mindful. The first paragraph of Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Peace is Every Step, he says, every morning when we wake up, we have 24 brand new hours to live. What a precious gift this is. We have the capacity to live in a way that these 24 hours will bring peace, joy, and happiness to ourselves and others. What better way to practice than this? Any questions or any comments? Oh, I'm not working with the children, am I? Well, if there's no questions or comments, thank you all so much for listening to my talk, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.